Hi guys, and welcome back to SwitchUp. Today we've got a lovely little idea from Glenn. It's always your idea, isn't it? You're a man of good ideas.
Yeah, this is an idea that I've had knocking about in my head for a couple of weeks now, and there's a game that I've played recently that's really sealed the deal for me. So this is 10 games, 5 each, that really surprised us. So games that we didn't have any real expectations of, that we were pleasantly surprised by when we played them.
The first game for me is a game called Omensight. It uses the Unreal 4 engine and is a top-down action RPG. The interesting hook here is that it almost has a Groundhog Day mechanic to it, and you're trying to solve a mystery. Now, I won't spoil what that is, but I really liked how you got to take on several different characters, playing through the same events, and sometimes even seeing yourself fighting in the background from a previous memory. There's a nice leveling system in place as well, and the difficult thing to do with a game like this is to keep those same environments interesting, and it does it excellently.
Right, my first game then is a game called WorldEnd Syndrome. Now I picked this up on a bit of a whim as I had a voucher for a video game store here in the UK. It's a visual novel set around a murder that happens in a small town. Now I've enjoyed visual novels in the past. Last Window and Room 215, Hotel Dusk are some of my favourite games of all time, but there have not been many on the Switch so far that have caught my attention. This one just has some very good writing and some very interesting characters. The protagonist's best friend, whose name escapes me I must admit, is just a very, very funny person, and it just keeps the story ticking along.
You didn't mention My Girlfriend is a Mermaid. That's disappointing.
I'm still trying to forget it, that's why.
My second choice is a very well-known one, and it was one of our biggest ever reviews. It's a game called Warframe that was released free-to-play on the Nintendo Switch. Now, there's two parts to this story. The first is that I tried to play it back when I had a PC. It wasn't the most demanding game back then, but I had a terrible graphics card and my PC exploded. And the second was that it was one of those games that nobody thought would come to the Switch. There's a huge amount of content on offer here, but really, it was just how surprisingly good this was for a free-to-play game, and it blew me away when I played it for the review. There aren't many games where it's just so much better playing with random strangers online. I think probably the only other one I can think of off the top of my head is maybe Diablo. There's an amazing amount of content, and they've even updated it a few times since it was launched on Switch. If you haven't played it, or if you're a bit short of cash, go and download it now, although you're going to need a pretty hefty SD card.
My next pick is a game called Happy Birthdays, which is published by NIS America. Now I got this for Father's Day from my little girl, and the first thing that struck me and worried me slightly, the name of it is very bizarre, and secondly, the front cover had a huge smiling cartoon dinosaur on it, looked like Barney's little brother. It's actually a simulation game where you have to terraform a piece of land, changing the temperature as you go, and therefore growing new species as you move through the ages. Now, having put a little bit more time in it, I can actually say it's a very fun game. It's not your usual fun in that you're waiting around waiting for things to happen quite a lot, but you do start to anticipate which species might evolve next, and that keeps you playing. A good game, this one.
My next game is one called Pinstripe. Now this is a side-scrolling adventure title, but it's very dark in tone. You lose your daughter early on in the tale and spend the rest of the game trying to recapture her from a quite sinister villain named Mr. Pinstripe. Initially I thought this was a Metroidvania, but it really isn't. There are a few little elements to it where you have to get certain items that will let you progress to different areas, but this is an adventure through and through. It just has some really eerie and interesting characters in there and some nice puzzles thrown in. It's not just a no-brainer, walk from left to right, by the numbers adventure game. And although it's only a few hours long, at around about 5 perhaps, it felt like a really well-rounded package.
The next one I want to talk about then is the one that prompted me to want to make this list in the first place. It's a game called Vice Project Doom. Now it's a bit of a curveball in that it's one of the NES games that you get if you subscribe to Nintendo Online, but it's a game I knew absolutely nothing about, and having played it, it was a really pleasant surprise. It's basically a mixture of Spy Hunter and I would say Ninja Gaiden, I suppose, in that you have top-down vehicle sections and side-scrolling action sections. But it's very well done and has some very good cutscenes as well. I don't know if this is a game that people already know about and is revered anyway, but I, as I said, never heard of it, and it's a great little game.
I'm going to put the next two games together because there's part 1 and 2 out on the Switch, and those are the Baobabs Mausoleum titles. This top-down adventure is deceptive in that it looks a little bit like it might play out like maybe a Zelda clone or something like that, but it really isn't anything like that. For example, you might find yourself firing a squirrel from a cannon to take someone's beer out of their hand. It is just bonkers, but in the best possible way. It's a single developer, really nice chap, and the game itself is a real love letter to the games that he enjoyed as a child. A very, very fun experience. You actually play as the main character, who is an eggplant, I believe, a purple one, a purple eggplant detective. What more could you want?
Right, next I want to talk about a game that I reviewed fairly recently now called Fantasy Strike. Now it's not to say that I had low expectations of this game, it's just there are a lot of good fighting games on the Switch already, so I take any new one with a pinch of salt, but actually this one is very, very good. What I like most about it is just how accessible it is to newcomers, but how nuanced it is for anyone that wants to take that further and become quite competitive with it. It's got a lovely hand-drawn art style, and the online mode was very smooth as well. It's fairly pricey for a digital-only game, and that's probably the main drawback. But if it ever does go on sale, I would highly recommend you have a look at this one.
There are so many games that get compared to Dark Souls, like, oh, this is the Dark Souls of racing, this is the Dark Souls of puzzle games. But there was one that was mentioned a few times called Salt and Sanctuary that I was just intrigued by, so I gave it a shot, not really expecting much. This is an absolutely brilliant game, and I would say it stands well and truly on its own 2 feet. It's a side-scrolling 2D game that is a little similar to the aforementioned title, but it also has co-op in here as well if you're keen enough to find it. The make or break element with these games seems to be the world that you inhabit, and they've done a brilliant job here. It must be a little bit more tricky to do it in a 2D plane, I should imagine, but that being said, every different area feels unique, but it has this almost heaviness about it as you play. It is brutal, don't get me wrong. You'll hit that first boss and then you'll repeatedly hit him, probably till you give up for a while. A very, very good game if you're willing to stick with it.
Final game of the list then is a game called Membrane. Now, this game was on sale for 9 cents. I mean, you find that down the back of the sofa of a morning, don't you, to be fair? And I had practically zero expectation of it. The colours were gaudy, there was no trailer that I can remember, but it was so cheap I felt compelled to buy it. And having said that, I was very pleasantly surprised. I would describe it as a puzzle platformer, I guess, where you have to build membranes to get around the level. You're within the human body, trying to get to the exit on each stage. There are collectibles to try and get as well, and obviously the levels get more complex as you go along. It's one of those games where you can play one level or end up playing 10 within one session, and I don't know what price it normally goes for, but it's certainly a game that you'd get some enjoyment out of at a decent sale price.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of this list. Quite an unusual one to make because you're not really looking for those games. Many of you will say, oh, Breath of the Wild should be in there, Doom should be in there, but actually those games you kind of knew were good anyway before you played them. These are games that kind of snuck up on you. You played them and were like, my goodness, this is amazing. Let us know down in the comments yours, because I'm sure there'll be loads in there that we perhaps haven't played ourselves, and it'll be great for the rest of the community.
Yeah, I'm sure we've said before, that's the best part of making these lists. It's sharing our ideas with yourselves, but also hearing the ideas that you have in terms of games that really surprised you in a positive way. Anyway, that's the end of the list, as Mark said. A quick thank you to our Patreons, as always, for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.
For all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!